In 1974, a grain farmer's wife outside Rosetown, Saskatchewan, packed the same snack in her children's lunch pails every day for 3 school years. It was number 11 on this list. The oats came from their own field. The dates cost 45 cents a pound at the co-op. She never bought a single packaged snack in her life. Number 8 cost less than a dime to make. Number 14 showed up at every church bake sale from Lethbridge to Brandon and sold out before anything else on the table. These 25 snacks kept Prairie children fed between meals during a decade when mothers baked everything from scratch and corner stores still sold candy by the piece. Families stretching a wheat check across a long winter. Women filling cookie tins on Sunday afternoons so the week would hold. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten Canadian prairie snacks from the 1970s no one makes anymore. Number 25. Lard cookies. Before Crisco, before butter was affordable, there was lard. A pound of it cost 19 cents in 1972 at the Safeway in Swift Current. Farm wives across southern Saskatchewan and Alberta used it the way French bakers used butter. Creamed with sugar, mixed with flour, and a little vanilla, rolled out on a floured table, and cut with the rim of a drinking glass. No cookie cutter needed. These were not pretty. They were pale, flat, and slightly crumbly, but they melted on your tongue in a way that shortening cookies never could. Grandmothers kept them in a tin on the counter. The tin was never empty, refilled the way other people refilled the salt shaker, without thinking, without being asked. Number 24. Rollkuchen. If you grew up Mennonite anywhere between Steinbach, Manitoba, and Coaldale, Alberta, you knew this snack. Thin strips of dough, rolled flat, sliced with a knife, and dropped into a pot of hot lard until they puffed up golden and blistered. Mothers pulled them out with a slotted spoon and drained them on newspaper. That was it. No glaze, no icing, just fried dough, hot and cracking at the edges. In summer, families ate rollkuchen with cold watermelon on the porch. In winter, with soup. A batch of dough cost almost nothing. Flour, eggs, milk, a spoonful of cream. The lard was already on the stove. Helen Reimer in Winkler, Manitoba, made rollkuchen every Saturday morning for 40 years. Her kitchen smelled like a county fair by 9 o'clock. Number 23. Rhubarb crumble bars. Every prairie farmyard had a rhubarb patch. It grew like a weed along the fence line, and nobody had to plant it because it came back every spring on its own. Mothers chopped the stalks, cooked them down with sugar, and spread the filling over a pressed oat crust in a 9x13 pan. More oats on top, baked until the edges browned. Cut into squares and stacked in a container for the week. The tartness of the rhubarb cut through the sweetness of the oats. Both flavors hit at once, sour and sweet, soft and crunchy. No kid on the prairies ever bought a granola bar in 1973. This was their granola bar, except it was better, because someone made it with her hands in a kitchen that smelled like Saturday morning. Number 22. Shmoo Torte. This was Winnipeg's secret, a layered sponge cake with custard filling and whipped cream, topped with crushed walnuts or pecans. The name came from the shmoo, a cartoon creature from the Lil Abner comic strip that gave people whatever they wanted. The tort did the same thing. It showed up at anniversary parties, retirement dinners, and every Ukrainian Christmas gathering in the North End. Jean's Bakery on Selkirk Avenue sold them for $3.50 in 1976. Women lined up on Saturday mornings. By noon, they were gone. Most families had a version passed down through 3 generations. The recipe card was written in pencil on a yellowed index card tucked inside a Betty Crocker cookbook. That card was worth more than the book. Number 21. Fried bologna sandwiches. A pound of bologna cost 49 cents at the IGA in 1975. You sliced it thick, scored the edges so it would not curl, and fried it in a cast iron pan until the outside went brown and crispy and the inside stayed soft and salty. Slap between 2 slices of white bread with mustard. That was the after-school snack for half the children on the prairies. No one asked what was in the bologna. No one cared. It was hot, it was fast, and it filled the gap between school and supper. In trailer parks outside Edmonton and apartment buildings in Saskatoon, this was the first thing a kid learned to cook alone. At 8 years old, standing on a chair to reach the stove. The sizzle in the pan meant you were feeding yourself. Number 20, flapper pie. This was the dessert that could start an argument at any prairie potluck. A graham cracker crust, a thick vanilla custard filling cooked on the stove, and a meringue topping browned under the broiler. That was flapper pie. Nobody knows exactly why it was called that. Some say it came from the flappers of the 1920s. Others say the meringue flapped when you carried it. The debate never ends, and nobody cares because the pie always disappeared before the argument was settled. Cafes across rural Alberta and Saskatchewan listed it on the menu in the 1970s. The Homestead restaurant in Drumheller served a version that people drove 40 miles to eat. A slice cost 75 cents. Grandmothers made it better. They always did. Number 19, honey and bread. This was the snack that needed no recipe and no explanation. A slice of homemade bread, a drizzle of honey from a local beekeeper. That was it. On farms across the parkland belt from Yorkton to Dauphin, children ate this after school while sitting on the back step, watching the sun cross the wheat fields. The honey came in a jar from a neighbor. Sometimes it was buckwheat honey, dark and heavy. Sometimes clover honey, light and floral. A pound of honey cost 55 cents in 1973 at the farmer's market in Saskatoon. The bread was baked that morning. Nobody spread honey on store-bought bread. That would have been like putting perfume on a scarecrow. The combination was so simple that it barely counted as a snack. But it was the one prairie children remembered 50 years later when someone asked about their childhood. Number 18, puffed wheat squares. This was the snack that held every church basement supper, every school bake sale, and every 4-H meeting together in Prairie, Canada. Alfred James Russell, a candy maker from the Maritimes, settled in Red Deer, Alberta around 1913 and started selling something that would define a region. The recipe had 5 ingredients: butter, corn syrup, brown sugar, cocoa powder, and a bag of puffed wheat cereal. You melted the first 4 together in a pot, poured the hot mixture over the puffed wheat, pressed it into a buttered pan, and waited. That was the whole recipe. A bag of puffed wheat cost 35 cents. The entire batch cost less than $1 and made enough squares to fill 2 lunch pails for a week. These were the prairie childhood staple. These were the currency of prairie childhood. You traded them at the lunch table, the way kids in the city traded hockey cards. A kid with puffed wheat squares had power. A kid without them had to negotiate. Every mother had her own ratio of corn syrup to brown sugar, and every mother believed hers was the correct one. In church basements, from Medicine Hat to Portage la Prairie, women set out trays of these on folding tables covered with paper cloths, and they vanished in minutes. The recipe traveled in purses, in church cookbooks with spiral bindings, and in handwritten letters between sisters who had married into different towns. It was never a secret. It was a covenant. You made them because your mother made them, and she made them because her mother made them. And somewhere back down the line, a woman in a farmhouse kitchen decided that 5 ingredients and 10 minutes was enough to make something worth passing on. Number 17, Saskatoon berry leather. Before fruit roll-ups came in plastic wrappers, prairie children ate the original. Saskatoon berries, picked wild from bushes along creek banks and coulee edges, were cooked down with a little sugar, spread thin on a baking sheet, and dried in the oven at the lowest setting for hours. The sheets of dried fruit came out leathery and dark, sweet with a faintly nutty taste that no commercial fruit snack has ever matched. A family could pick a 5-gallon pail of Saskatoon berries in an afternoon and turn half of it into leather that lasted all winter. The berries cost nothing, the sugar cost pennies, and the labor cost a sunburn and purple-stained fingers. Mothers rolled the sheets up and stored them in wax paper in the pantry. Children peeled off a strip and chewed it slowly, because once it was gone, the wait lasted until next July. Number 16. Cinnamon toast. A slice of white bread, toasted, buttered while still hot, then sprinkled with a mixture of white sugar and cinnamon. The butter melted into the bread, and the sugar formed a thin, slightly crunchy glaze on top. This was the snack every prairie child ate when they came inside from the cold. It took 90 seconds to make. A loaf of bread cost 24 cents in 1971. A bag of sugar cost 79 cents and lasted a month. Cinnamon was the one spice every prairie kitchen had, even kitchens that owned no other spice at all. Some mothers mixed the sugar and cinnamon in a jar and kept it next to the toaster so the children could make it themselves. That jar was the first taste of independence for a 6-year-old. You could make your own snack. You did not need to ask. Number 15. Matrimonial cake. On the prairies, they never called them date squares. They called them matrimonial cake. The joke was that the filling was 2 crumbs held together by a few dates. That was the kind of humor that got you through a Saskatchewan winter. A thick layer of cooked dates sandwiched between 2 layers of buttery oat crumble, baked until the oats turned golden and the date filling bubbled at the edges. The recipe appeared in every community cookbook published between Moose Jaw and Red Deer in the 1970s. The 5 Roses Flour cookbook printed a version. The Purity cookbook had one too. Jean Chicken in Melfort, Saskatchewan brought a pan of these to every funeral in town for 22 years. Nobody asked her to. She just showed up. Because on the prairies, grief was answered with baking, and matrimonial cake was the answer that always fit. Number 14. Cheese Whiz on crackers. This was not cooking. This was survival. A jar of Cheese Whiz cost 89 cents at the co-op in 1974. A box of Premium Plus crackers cost 45 cents. Together, they made the fastest snack on the prairies. Lid off, butter knife out, bright orange paste spread on a cracker. No plate needed. Standing at the counter, still wearing a snowsuit because it had not come off yet. This was the snack of impatience. The snack of a child who had walked home from school in -30 and could not wait for anything that required an oven or a stove. There was no elegance in it. There was no craft. But there was a jar of Cheese Whiz in every prairie refrigerator in 1975, and anyone who denies that is lying to themselves and to this channel. Kraft sold more Cheese Whiz per person in Saskatchewan than anywhere else in the country. That is not a boast. That is an archaeological fact. It tells you what kitchens looked like, what cupboards held, what children reached for when nobody was watching. The crackers broke. The Cheese Whiz dripped. The kid ate it over the sink and wiped the knife on a dish towel and went outside again. That was the whole ritual. No recipe card, no church cookbook, no grandmother passing anything down except the knowledge that hunger does not wait for presentation. Open the jar. Eat. Go back out into the cold. 50 years later, a man in Regina will tell you he has not eaten Cheese Whiz since he was 12, but his eyes will go somewhere else when he says it, somewhere warmer than the kitchen he is remembering. Number 13. Vinartura. In Gimli, Manitoba, this was not a snack, it was an identity. Icelandic immigrants brought the recipe in the 1870s, when nearly a fifth of the Iceland's population left for North America. 7 thin layers of almond cardamom shortbread were stacked with cooked prune filling between each one, then wrapped in cloth and left to age for days until the flavors merged. The whole cake was dense, spiced, and dark. A single slice was as heavy as a meal. In Gimli and across the Interlake region, families served vinarterta at Christmas, at weddings, at confirmations. Subbing any other fruit for prunes was considered an offense. The cake has almost vanished from Iceland itself, but in Manitoba, fifth-generation Icelandic Canadians still make it every December from recipe cards written in a language their great-grandmothers spoke. Number 12. Butter tarts. No church bazaar in Prairie, Canada was complete without them. No fall fair, no Grey Cup party. A flaky pastry shell filled with butter, sugar, eggs, and a splash of vanilla, baked until the filling set, but the center stayed slightly liquid. The debate over raisins divided entire congregations. Some families added them, others considered it a crime. A butter tart cost 10 cents at a bake sale in 1976. You could buy a dozen for $1, and nobody thought twice about it. The recipe appeared in the 5 Roses Flour cookbook as early as 1913. By the 1970s, every woman on the prairies had her version written on a card inside a recipe box on top of the refrigerator. That box held more history than most libraries. Number 11. Pierogi. In every Ukrainian household across the prairies, these small buns appeared on kitchen tables like clockwork. Soft yeast dough wrapped around a filling of seasoned ground beef, or cottage cheese and dill, or sauerkraut, baked golden in the oven, or fried in lard until the outside crackled. In Vegreville, Alberta, and Kenora, Saskatchewan, pierogi were the after-school snack that greeted children the moment they walked through the door. A plate of them, still warm, sitting under a tea towel on the counter. The dough cost pennies. The filling was whatever was left from last night's supper. Anna Krawchuk in Mundare, Alberta, made 200 pierogi every Christmas and gave them away to neighbors. She never counted. She said counting a gift was the same as taking it back. Number 10. Fried bannock with jam. On the reserves and in Métis communities across the prairies, bannock was the bread that fed families when grocery stores were too far away or too expensive to visit. Flour, baking powder, a pinch of salt, and enough water to make a dough. Fried in lard in a cast iron pan until the outside went golden and the inside stayed soft and warm. Spread with Saskatoon berry jam or wild strawberry preserves. A batch of bannock cost less than 20 cents to make in 1975. It filled stomachs that store-bought bread could not reach. Children ate it after school, standing in kitchens where the wood stove was the only source of heat. Elders broke pieces off and handed them to grandchildren without a word. The bread said everything. It said someone was home. It said someone cared enough to stand over a hot stove. It said, "You belong here." Number 9. Dill pickle chips from the barrel. Before the snack aisle existed, there was the barrel. General stores across rural Alberta and Saskatchewan kept a wooden barrel of dill pickles near the front counter. Reach in with a pair of tongs, pull out a pickle, and pay 2 cents. That was the snack for the walk home. The brine soaked into the wood, and after a few months, the barrel itself smelled like garlic and dill. Some stores sliced the pickles into chips and sold them in small paper bags for a nickel. In Eston, Saskatchewan, the general store on Main Street kept a barrel from 1968 until it closed in 1983. Kids stopped there every day after school. The owner never rushed them. He let them stand by the barrel and decide, the big one or the small one, the crunchy one or the soft one. It was the first real decision most of them ever made. Number 8. Nanaimo bars. The name came from Vancouver Island, but the bars traveled west to east like weather. By the 1970s, every church cookbook on the prairies had a version. 3 layers, a graham cracker, and coconut base pressed into a pan, a thick custard-flavored butter icing in the middle, a shell of melted chocolate on top. No baking required. A woman in Nanaimo submitted the recipe to a local hospital cookbook in 1952, and within 20 years it had crossed every provincial border in the country. Lazy Gourmet Cafe in Vancouver sold them by the hundreds in the 1970s. On the prairies, they appeared at every potluck, every bridal shower, every funeral lunch. A pan of Nanaimo bars cost about $1.25 to make in 1976. They looked like something from a bakery window. They tasted like someone had spent hours in the kitchen. But the truth was, you could make them in 30 minutes and nobody would ever know. That was the genius of prairie baking. It was never about difficulty. It was about making something beautiful out of time you did not have. A farm wife with 6 children and 300 acres and a husband who would not be home until dark still found the 30 minutes to press that base into the pan, spread the icing, melt the chocolate, and set it in the cold room to firm. Not because she had to, because the potluck was Thursday and she would not show up empty-handed. That was not pride. That was participation. You brought something because you belonged to something. And the Nanaimo bar, 3 layers thick and cut into perfect squares, was the proof that you had shown up, that your kitchen was still running, that the week had not beaten you. For a prairie woman in 1976, a pan of Nanaimo bars was not a dessert. It was a declaration. Number 7, brown sugar fudge. A pot, a stove, and a candy thermometer if you had one. Brown sugar, butter, evaporated milk, and vanilla. Stirred over medium heat until it reached soft ball stage, then beaten with a wooden spoon until it thickened and lost its shine. Poured into a buttered pan and cut into squares. That was prairie fudge, not chocolate fudge. Brown sugar fudge. It tasted like caramel and butter, and something that does not have a name, except maybe autumn. Farm wives made it in October when the harvest was done, and the kitchen was finally theirs again. A batch cost less than 60 cents. It lasted maybe 2 days if you hid it. 1 day if you did not. Grandmothers wrapped pieces in wax paper and slipped them into coat pockets before the walk to school. By recess, they were soft and warm from body heat, eaten behind the school where the teachers could not see. Number 6, sunflower seeds on the porch. Nobody sold them in bags. Families grew them. Sunflower fields stretched across southern Manitoba and southeastern Saskatchewan like yellow oceans in August. At harvest, families cut the heads off, dried them in the sun, and roasted the seeds with salt on a baking sheet in the oven. Then you sat on the porch and ate them one at a time, cracking each shell with your teeth and spitting the hull into the yard. That was a Saturday afternoon. There was no television to compete with, no phone to check, just a bowl of sunflower seeds and the sound of your own teeth cracking shells and the wind moving through the wheat. A sunflower head the size of a dinner plate could keep a kid occupied for an hour. The salt stung your lips. Your fingers turned gray. The pile of empty hulls beside your chair grew into a small mountain. Nobody told you to stop. Nobody told you to come inside. Stopping was your decision. Coming inside was your decision. And for a child on the prairies in 1974, that kind of freedom was the real snack. Number 5, lefse with butter and sugar. The Norwegian settlers brought this one. It is a thin flatbread made from potatoes, flour, butter, and cream. The dough is rolled out on a special grooved board and cooked on a flat griddle until brown spots appear. Then it is spread with butter, sprinkled with white sugar, rolled up like a cigar, and eaten warm. In communities like Camrose, Alberta, and Outlook, Saskatchewan, lefse was Christmas and Thanksgiving, and every Tuesday in between. The dough was temperamental. Too much flour and it cracked. Too little and it stuck to the rolling pin. Grandmothers could feel the right texture by hand. They never measured. A batch of lefse cost 40 cents for the potatoes and not much more for the rest. But it required time and patience, and a rolling pin that had been in the family so long the handles were smooth from 100 hands. That cannot be bought in a store. It is inherited or done without. Number 4. Raisin squares. 2 layers of oat crumble with a thick raisin filling in the middle. The raisins were cooked on the stove with water, sugar, and a squeeze of lemon juice until they softened into a dark, jammy paste, pressed between the oat layers and baked until golden. Some people called these funeral squares because they showed up at every reception after a prairie burial. Others called them matrimonial squares with raisins instead of dates. Either way, they were the square that filled every gap in a prairie kitchen. Not enough cookies for the week. Make raisin squares. Company coming on Sunday. Make raisin squares. A box of raisins cost 39 cents in 1974 and made 2 full pans. Nobody's recipe was original. Everybody's recipe was perfect. Number 3. Farmer sausage on bread. In Mennonite communities from Winkler to Rosthern, this was not a snack. It was a way of life. Farmer sausage was a coarse pork sausage, smoked and cured, sold in long loops at the local butcher shop or made at home in the fall when the hogs were slaughtered. It was sliced thick, laid on dark rye bread, and eaten cold. No mustard, no garnish. The sausage was salty and smoky and slightly firm. The bread was dense and dark. Together, they were the most satisfying 2 ingredients in the history of prairie eating. A loop of farmer sausage cost $1.25 at the butcher in Altona, Manitoba in 1975. It lasted a family a week if the father did not get to it first. Children carried slices of it in their lunch pails wrapped in wax paper. By noon, the bread had absorbed the fat from the sausage and gone slightly translucent. That was not a flaw. That was the whole point. Number 2. Chokecherry jelly on toast. Every coulee, every river bottom, every fence line on the prairies grew chokecherries. They were too bitter to eat raw. A face puckered just looking at them. But cooked with sugar and strained through cheesecloth, they turned into a jelly so deep red it looked like stained glass in the jar. Women picked them in August, standing in ditches along gravel roads with ice cream pails hanging from their arms. A good afternoon yielded enough berries for a dozen jars. The jelly set firm and clean, tart and sweet in equal measure. Spread on hot buttered toast, it was the taste of a prairie morning. By 1985, fewer women were making it. The next generation did not know where the bushes were. They did not own cheesecloth. They bought jam at the Safeway and never thought about what they had lost. Pause 1 second. Number 1. Saskatoon berry pie. This was the crown. The pie that defined the prairies. Saskatoon berries grow wild across Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba. Indigenous peoples used them in pemmican for thousands of years before any settler arrived. The berries are small and dark, sweeter than blueberries, with a faint almond taste that comes from the seeds. In July, families drove into the countryside with buckets and spent whole afternoons picking them along creek banks. A 5-gallon pail was a good haul. Half went into the freezer. The other half went into pie. A double crust, flaky with lard, filled with berries, sugar, a squeeze of lemon, and a tablespoon of flour to thicken the juice. Baked until the crust went golden, and the filling bubbled through the slits cut in the top. During harvest, farm wives baked these for threshing crews of 15 or 20 men who expected pie after a day in the field. The berries were free. The flour and lard cost pennies. The labor cost a sore back and stained hands that stayed purple for a week. But no one measured the cost of a Saskatoon berry pie in dollars. You measured it in distance. How far you drove to the best bushes, how long you stood in the sun picking, how many pies you made, and how fast they disappeared. A pie lasted one sitting, maybe two if you hid a slice in the back of the refrigerator, but someone always found it. Someone always did. Make one of these this week. Start with the puffed wheat squares or the cinnamon toast or the matrimonial cake, something that takes 30 minutes with ingredients already in the cupboard. Sit at the kitchen table when you eat it. Not the couch, not the car, the table. Set a place even if it is just for one. Share which one you are going to make first in the comments. Tell me if a grandmother made the brown sugar fudge or the roll kuchen. Tell me if anyone still knows where the Saskatoon berry bushes are, because that grain farmer's wife in Rosetown is 87 years old now. She does not bake anymore, but her daughter does, and her granddaughter is learning. And the recipe card in the kitchen drawer, the one written in pencil on a yellowed index card, still has flour dust in the creases. As long as someone is still pressing puffed wheat into a buttered pan on a Sunday afternoon, the Prairies have not forgotten who they are. These were never just snacks. They were proof that a kitchen with flour, sugar, and a woman who refused to sit idle could feed a family through anything. The ingredients were cheap. The labor was free. The memory is the part that cost something.